Episode 4. Later that evening, as the gathering was coming to a close, Faith was in the room nursing the baby when her husband, Mr. Balogun, entered. He sat close to her and narrated everything that had transpired before they arrived at the house, leaving out no details. Faith consoled him in Igbo, "My husband, just take it easy. Let's leave everything to God. He will guide and teach us what to do." Mr. Balogun smiled warmly and walked over to the baby, kissing her forehead. "God will bless you," he said. As he stood up to leave, Faith asked, "Don't tell me you're not planning to sleep over?" Mr. Balogun replied, "I was planning to, but with the situation at home, I need to see my children and explain things to them." Faith, being a very understanding woman, nodded mercifully and asked him to greet her children, particularly Mummy Tolu. Mr. Balogun smiled, hugged her, and said, "You are a nice woman." When Mr. Balogun arrived home, he called his children together and narrated everything to them. Tolu said, "Daddy, we understand. We know you didn't mean to take this step." Mrs. Balogun stood by the door, trying to listen in on their conversation. Mr. Balogun continued, "You are my children, and I am still your father. You know how much I love you all." They nodded in affirmation, and he hugged them, crying profusely. "I love you very much, my babies." He asked Liz to call her mother for him. When Liz relayed the message, Mrs. Balogun responded angrily, "If he wants to see me, tell him to come himself." Liz returned to her father and told him what her mother had said. Mr. Balogun, knowing his wife's intentions, called out to her loudly from the sitting room, "Mummy Tolu, please come. I want to talk to you." She walked in sluggishly, sat down, and said, "NN, what do you want to see me for?" Mr. Balogun apologized for keeping the news from them and explained that he never wished to take a second wife. However, Mrs. Balogun cut him off, saying, "But you did. Why are you going back?" Mr. Balogun continued to praise Faith's qualities, trying not mention her name, forgetting his sister already mentioned it to her angrily. He was still saying all the qualities of Faith. When Mrs. Balogun cut him off again saying, "Is this why you called me?" he continued, "She even said I should greet you." On hearing this, Mrs. Balogun grew angrier, saying, "Is she mad? Why?" Mr. Balogun stood up, angry, and said, "Don't ever say that about her again." She was taken aback. He had never raised his voice at her before, despite her behavior. She was shocked and scared. Mr. Balogun took his keys, asked his children if they needed anything, gave them some pocket money, and left the house. He arrived at Faith's house late that night, and when he entered, Faith was shocked to see him. He walked past her and went into the room. Faith brought him a chilled drink from the fridge, and he recounted everything that had happened. Faith calmed him down, and he eventually fell asleep. Meanwhile, Mrs. Balogun sat in shock, thinking of ways to harm Faith and her child. The children went to their rooms and slept, while Mrs. Balogun remained seated, thinking, until past 2 a.m. She thought to herself, "This lady can't snatch my husband from me. Or am I dreaming?" She didn't sleep that night and decided to visit her mother in Ogun State the following morning. When she arrived at her mother's village in the afternoon, she narrated everything to her mother, who supported her, saying, "Is the lady mad? Doesn't she know whose daughter you are?" After hours of talking and jesting, Mrs. Balogun prepared to leave, and her mother gave her a black soap, instructing her to rub it on her palm whenever she wanted to see Faith. Instructed her to shake Faith's palm. She was told that this would make Faith eventually leave her husband for her. Mrs. Balogun was overjoyed and thanked her mother. Days passed. She thought to herself, "It's been 7 days already, and there's only 1 day left until the naming ceremony. This is my time to strike." The preparations for the ceremony were underway, with everyone present, cooking various dishes. Find out what happens next in episode 5. Don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos.